My hope is that when you sit with someone, literally, physically, have to sit with somebody else and someone else's ideas for a while in a space that asks you to listen, I think that can be really transformative. And I think, again, part of that is the wonder and the courage of an audience member to arrive and the courage of a performer to be vulnerable, to tell the story, to use their body as a conduit for that conversation.
Based out of the University of the Fraser Valley on unceded traditional lands of the Stolo people, we are the Community Health and Social Innovation Hub, or CHASI for short. We support the social, mental, emotional, physical, and economic health of those living in our communities by bringing together experts from across disciplines. Those experts have some incredible stories and insights. To share those with the communities we serve, we bring you the CHASIcast, a monthly program where we drill down on a current topic and chat about how it impacts our lives.
I'm thrilled to be here today for another version of CHASIcast, and today I'm with Dr. Shelley Liebembuk from the theater department, and super excited to talk to you a bit about your journey to UFV and certainly the the-laramie-project, which, as you know, is how we met, as I saw that poster and was so excited.
Yeah.
So welcome, Shelley, and would love just to hear you talk a bit about, your journey to UFV.
Perfect. Thank you, Martha. It's great to be here. It's super exciting to get to talk about the Laramie-project that opens this week, and also kind of broadly about arriving here at U of V and seeing how we can amplify what the theater program does for the community here. So it's a really great opportunity. Thank you. Generally, I came out to U of V 4 years ago now. Had never been really in Abbotsford before, so it was very new. And I was coming from teaching in Mount Allison University, which is in New Brunswick. And before that, I did my doctorate and my postdoc in Toronto in theater and performance studies. And my background is as an actor. I trained in New York at the Atlantic Theater Company Conservatory and worked in acting for a while and didn't find like it was meeting all of the things I wanted to be doing. So I was really excited to go back and study theater and performance studies and think about it and put all that together. And I'm really excited to be here because I feel like as an educator at U of V, I get to draw on all of those things from my love of acting and working with student actors here, and also thinking about how theater functions to build community and to think critically about work. And also, again, teaching theater and performance studies in a way that recognizes that it is both a practice and includes criticality and includes theory and is really a creative engagement with thinking across a lot of different topics and thematics and methodologies, I guess.
No, wonderful. And I know this is a natural sort of segue into the Laramie-project, but Can you talk a little bit about the importance of theater in these times?
Right. Yeah, it's a great question. I think, especially coming out of COVID or kind of in whatever we are in now, for me, when theaters closed and we couldn't gather in any way, honestly, you couldn't even gather at a friend's house, the value of coming into a space and sharing the same space and time with someone in real time, and getting to experience something together and be part of something, both as a performer in an ensemble, but also as an audience, it became even more clear than ever that is so important to me. And so as soon as, even during the pandemic, I should say, I did direct a show here via Zoom. So I made a Zoom play of Antigone, which was still, again, I think the idea was to still allow the space for us to be thinking and be using art to respond and reflect on our current times. To me, that's always very important. I'm not the first by any means who thinks that way, but I think art really is a wonderful way to refract our lived experience and allow for different entry points to how we, how are we supposed to do what we do, and how are we supposed to hopefully figure out better ways of doing and being with each other. So again, I think doing a Zoom play was still the attempt to keep making theater, and I think being able to come back to working in a live medium with the students here has been amazing. And I think, again, it's so important because my hope is that when you sit with someone, literally, physically, have to sit with somebody else and someone else's ideas for a while in a space that asks you to listen, I think that can be really transformative. And I think, again, part of that is the wonder and the courage of an audience member to arrive, and the courage of a performer to be vulnerable, to tell the story, to use their body as a conduit for that conversation. And again, so I think the potential is enormous, to really say we're gathering here and you're asked to just come and listen and reflect. And that, again, that's where, for me, theater can offer various, pushes back against the idea of also just consumption, right? Art as consumption. It is both entertainment. I believe very much in what Bertolt Brecht said, which was, we can't teach anything if we're not also entertaining. So I think it's really important for political theater, or theater that has a social activist perspective, which I hope the work I'm doing always does. It's that question of how do we engage, civic engagement, social engagement. We need to also, of course, amuse our audience, allow all of us to feel welcome, to feel invited, but then also, find those spaces where then we can poke back a bit. And I at least always find that in the theater, we're kind of together in that space, so it hopefully can create that space where we can actually have that conversation, I guess, for lack of a better word.
When I saw the poster, we didn't know each other, and I saw the poster with your name on it, which prompted me to reach out. I was honestly filled in the same moment with a deep sadness that it's so relevant in 2023, and that and great excitement because of the vehicle I know the Laramie-project to be.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about your choice?
Yes, thank you. Again, originally was prompted by this idea, we have at the theater program, we're always kind of asked to plan the next season, and I was excited to direct, and the prompt was actually looking at something canonical. We often have these requirements as a small program. And again, going back and realizing the Laramie-project, yes, it's canonical. It's 23 years ago that this verbatim piece took North America by storm. Again, it's a piece that is a verbatim set of interviews of a community responding right after the brutal murder of Matthew Shepard, who was a young gay man. And it also obviously was so topical because, as you know, we were the state of how the LGBTQ plus community is being treated and thought about in the mainstream is, again, there's so many hateful perspectives that are claiming to be virtuous and moralizing their perspective. And so again, I think, we're in a time, in a moment where it's heinous. And I think, having been here for 4 years, I think the recognition that also here in Abbotsford and working to serve the U of V community, there's a lot of religious conservative beliefs that don't recognize how intolerant they are, how much hate-filled content their exclusions are harboring, I guess, for lack of a better word. So for me, again, a big part of this piece is twofold. One is to make the space to have this conversation with students, to bring in and support and make visible students who are in the LGBTQ plus community, allies to that community, but also to hopefully, do that really heavy lifting of making people realize that just because you're not aware of your intolerance doesn't mean you're not actively doing violence all the time. And I think, to me, that's what this play captures so meaningfully, is how violent inaction can be, and how violent our assumption that our perspective is not cruel, it's live and let live, or it's just not how I see things, how dangerous that is. And I think, again, the play has a way in the fact that the play is actually allowing us to hear all of these voices, and kind of have to sit there and sift through all of these voices, the hateful ones, the ones that are negotiating their position, the ones that are shocked at the violence, and so on, and actually force ourselves, I think, actually to realize our own accountability and how proximally some of the voices that maybe we would prefer not to recognize as proximal are. And in taking it up again, in taking it up here, I was still very surprised in the fall when I was trying to gather, students toward the show, how many conversations I had with folks who were not comfortable with working on this piece. And I think to me, each of those conversations, first of all, was a practice in figuring out how to truly make space to have a conversation with someone who has a different perspective hopefully moving toward a more joint, humane perspective. It realizes that, again, some of these questions of not agreeing with a lifestyle are active intolerance and violence. But also, again, it really, with each of those conversations, made it so clear how significant this piece is, generally in this now, but really also very specifically locally here. These conversations do not seem to be taking place. There seems to be an assumption that, this is some minority that we can kick to the side. We don't have to think about it, without realizing, again, that the core, I think, of being a humanitarian, of working at a liberal arts institution, of trying to believing in social justice, is that every person is a human. And if we don't do that work to recognize what our innate prejudices are, then we're failing.
It's interesting as you're speaking. I think that love the sinner, hate the sin is given so much permission, continues to do, and has forever, certainly, in my life. And I think this space that we teach in, this community, there's challenges for that, and we see it when our students bring forward their own navigation of these issues. So I think it's so profoundly important, and I think we sort of provide greater space around sexuality because this, I wonder, this separation of identity and behavior. And you see that in the play, this discussion about Matthew, but, the gay rage thing or the behavior, or and you see that with various characters that are in people that are reflected in the play. So I wonder how you navigated a bit of that.
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think, just to give you an example, for instance, in rehearsal, I'm so lucky I'm working with an 11-person cast here of fantastic students who just so willingly jumped onto this project. And, we'd be working on a piece and suddenly, or on a scene or a moment, they're called moments in Tectonic Theater Company's work. And, I'd kind of be working to redirect it, and I'd say, okay, but look at what these words are saying. A big question I asked all the actors to think about as they worked on the text was, what is said and what is unsaid? Also in the context of interviews, as we're doing now, right? How do you formulate toward a public something you're saying? So what is kind of, in all language, obviously, what is the subtext is important, especially as actors, but also kind of what are we refraining from saying, or what are we trying to kind of manipulate or clean up, or, and kind of finding all that ambiguity and all the complexity and all the grittiness under these materials. And I think we continued in rehearsal to kind of be taken aback by how, for instance, something could be said for a moment, and even as onlookers, even as a space where we're trying to think about the ethics of this piece, and sometimes we're like, go back to that line. And the line is heinous. And you just kind of go the line where this gets said. And then in other moments, it was so proximal that we, and raw, that we couldn't, that part of the navigation in rehearsal was even just saying, okay, we need to take some time, and we need to figure out how we can perform this, and how we can do that safely, and how we can actually embody this, how you can actually put those words in your mouth, or put this character on. Or even we had at the beginning, I offered some of the actors the opportunity at the end of an embodiment to just literally shake off that character. And I think that process and the processing of that, even, for instance, there's one character, Marge Murray, and again, it's a real person who, has such, she has, there's some very humorous moments. She's a very motherly, caring figure. I think there are moments where I really love this character. And then there's some things that this character says that the cognitive dissonance of hearing that is so stark. And also at the same time, I think the ambiguity of, what are all these things that people hold and can kind of use at the same time, and that we just kind of go, yeah, okay, but that's just Bob, or, that's just my mom. And sometimes, and it's, and I think kind of, getting to know these characters in rehearsal and the murkiness of that has been really fascinating. And I think as well, obviously how we take that into everything else that we do and every other way that we present and perform as we just move through life, right? What are the ways that we allow certain things in certain scenarios because we figure that that's somehow just the easier path through. And I think, again, I feel very lucky that a lot of the folks I've been working with have been also willing to share that navigation in their own lives, and the process of learning and unlearning a lot of things.
Can you tell me on it? Maybe I should have done this homework, but moments. Like, I think it just is so fitting because that's how it feels as we navigate these spaces in life,
Right.
and that the theater group calls them moments. Can you educate me a bit about, is that something they only do, or what is that?
Yeah. I'd love to. So Tectonic Theater Company kind of coins this idea for their process, which is called like moments. So the idea is as they're devising work or as they're creating work, rather than thinking about it in a more kind of traditional textual way, like saying, okay, this is the first act, which is, building up to this big climactic position and so on. They're instead kind of formulating work around kind of moments that have specific titles. And the title can be, for instance, some of the moments are, a journal entry in the Laramie-Project, but some are more conceptual, like magnitude or hope. And so it's this, or snow. So it's this idea of what is kind of the overall image or the driving, the driving kind of concept behind something, and how do you put it together? And it will include different actions. It might include different character snippets. But what's nice, so it doesn't follow a singular dramatic action, but rather the beat and the temporality is dictated by, as you say, by this idea of like, what's the thing you're capturing? What are you trying to hold here? Or what are you trying to articulate through? I think what I like about it for specifically for Laramie-Project is how it allows us to think of a specific thing across different perspectives. Broadly, again, in devising, I think other companies I've worked with also use moment work when they're doing collective devising processes. And for instance, when I worked with Blue Mouth Inc. as an intern dramaturg, what they do is they create material, they write, let's say, like the little things that are being created are each written on an index card and put on a wall. And then the index cards are kind of reorganized under moment brackets. So we can think a moment could be welcome at the beginning of a show. And you could think, okay, what are the different ways we can welcome an audience? And what's nice, again, what I like about the idea of a moment, it can incorporate contradictions and variety. And and going back to Tectonic Theater Company, and specifically with the Laramie-Project, I think what it really allows them to do is to carry us through the very real events and the post-event interviews with real people, and allow the logic to, again, both follow chronological time, but actually also break chronological time and follow thematics and different key concepts of how, as you're saying, Martha, how we actually try to negotiate these things or navigate these things in our actual life.
One of the things, this is so interesting, and could sit here and listen to you describe your practice forever, to be honest. It's so inspiring. I wonder sometimes in these situations that the people that come are the people that, are always in the room on the issues. Can you talk a little bit about that, specifically around Laramie, but about theater and who's drawn? You talked about audience earlier, so.
Yeah, that's such a great question, right? I think that's always the challenge of thinking, how do we draw in folks who might be a kind of an unsuspecting audience member? I often think about it also aesthetically in the sense of, maybe you're looking for something that's conventional, and here at this moment, I'm going to disrupt that convention. But it's a very, it's kind of walking a tightrope, because I think especially again now that many people, and again where we are specifically, that where many people are not familiar with live theater, the stakes seem really high. As I said before, the wonder of being in a room, having to listen and stay and be there for a certain amount of time is is a kind of contract, but it does feel like a big ask at a time when there are a lot of other things that we can engage with at what feel like more levels of personal control, right? I can watch things on my phone and I can turn it off if I don't like it, and so on, and I can switch to something else. And so this idea, especially with live theater, that we know that it kind of, obviously, in our case, it's always the same play. The play is published, you can read it, we're doing a performance of that play, we haven't improvised these things. But the fact is that when you join us for one of these evenings, it is its own event. And who is in that room affects the performance as well, right? If the audience has come in thinking, oh, this is very heavy material, then that's going to feel a certain way versus an audience that maybe is willing to laugh with us in the moments that we've created to laugh. I think for myself, my hope is always that people will be willing to take the risk. And for me, it's also important as an artist generally also to really, again, I mentioned welcome. I think for me, it's very important to be generous to the audience, just as I think of the way I set the space for the acting ensemble to come in and do the work. I think I want there to be space for people to come in to feel like they can take their time to navigate how they want to interact with us in this show. But I hope that they can also trust that part of the willingness to be there and the being there means that you will be challenged. And I think, again, within the Western convention at the moment, which is that you sit in a darkened theater, I think that's also fascinating. I don't think it has to be that way. I actually don't think necessarily that's the most comfortable way to be an audience. But I think it is supposed to gift us some sort of anonymity, some sort of quiet, reflective space to respond to things and feel not called upon, even as we're very much called upon to be kind of participating in what's happening. Broadly, I continue to hope that whoever comes to the theater, even if they already agree, and this is true for anything, with Laramie-Project's values and where it's hoping to go, but broadly, that, again, for me, what's wonderful is I think art can show us a different way to do the work. And I really, I hope that even if, it isn't someone sitting there and giving you a sermon about something. I mean, it can be. There are performances like that. But for instance, with Laramie-Project, it really isn't. And I think it's really trying to figure out, how do we sit with this from wherever our starting point is? Or even if we think we already know what we think, what happens when I watch this? And how does this connect to me today? Even again with Laramie-Project, this is a specific piece of history which we're amplifying and shifting because the performers are here and now, and this is happening here and now through their bodies this week.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So maybe you can remind everybody about the dates and the important information.
Yes, thank you. So the show opens this Thursday, March 23rd in D Building, room 105, and it runs Thursday, Friday evenings and Saturday matinees from this Thursday through to Saturday, April 1st. This first Saturday, we also have a post-show talkback facilitated by the UFV Pride Collective, and I really welcome folks to come out. We have an Eventbrite link that you can check. So if you go to Eventbrite and look up UFV Laramie-Project, you'll find us. And again, it's 6 shows, and we really hope that you'll come out and check it out.
Wonderful. And I want to thank you, going back to one of the things you said. I feel like I've been doing this work for a long time, and yet listening to you and hearing you talk about the production has made me rethink and learn some things about practice. So I just want to thank you very much for taking the time with us today.
Thank you, Martha. It's a pleasure.